Hello friends, this is your friend back with a new fanfic. What if Naruto found love with Tsubaki and built a harem? Naruto x Tsubaki x Sakura x Shizune x Tsunade. If you like this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and leave your thoughts in the comments. Now, let's start. Chapter 6, a few others start to see. Tsunade noted that Tsubaki hadn't turned around in a panicked fashion. In fact, she turned around rather slowly, and the sickeningly sweet smile on her face when she faced Tsunade actually unnerved the busty blonde a little. Her bloodshot eyes and tear-stained, puffy cheeks only served to make the smile look even spookier. I'm not wearing anything, Tsunade, Tsubaki offered, placing some emphasis on the woman's name. I can see that, Tsunade began somewhat embarrassedly. After a few moments where nobody moved, Tsubaki began again, with a slight edge to her sweet tone. Naruto's not wearing anything, either, Tsunade, one again placing emphasis on her name. I can see that, too, Tsunade responded again. Tsubaki developed a tick mark on her forehead as her eyebrow began to twitch. She growled out her next inquiry through gritted teeth, though she kept the spooky sweet smile. So then, why are you standing in my bedroom doorway staring at us when it is perfectly clear what we've just been doing, especially when I know the bedroom door was closed, Tsunade? Tsunade, now starting to sweat and blush a little, replied somewhat hastily, just come back some other time, sorry to have bothered you. Tsunade, Tsubaki began quickly, dropping her spooky sweet demeanor, causing the woman to freeze in her tracks while sighing in relief. Why don't you wait in the living room for us? We'll be out in a couple of minutes. Close the door, please. Sure, Tsunade was rather quick to say, and even quicker to comply. Tsubaki sighed as she turned back to Naruto. Well, the cat was going to be out of the bag by tonight. Anyway, I just didn't expect it to happen quite like that. Yeah, no kidding, Naruto responded in a deadpan. Well, I guess we ought to get dressed. Yeah. With that, the two of them got out of bed and quickly threw on a couple articles. Tsubaki also took a minute to splash some water on her face to remove some of her teary residue. Once they were at least presentable enough, they went into the living room to talk properly with their unexpected visitor, who was sitting on the love seat. Tsubaki was in the same panties and red silk robe she'd had on before, while Naruto had just thrown on his boxers and pants, leaving his top shirtless. Well, good morning, Tsubaki addressed Tsunade as she and Naruto both sat on the couch that was perpendicular to the love seat while both articles of furniture touched at the corner. Good morning, Tsunade began, clumsily. So, what's going on with you two? Nothing that isn't mutually consensual, I assure you, Tsubaki answered quickly in a tone that indicated Tsunade should probably leave it at that. So what brings you by? You're not often here this early in the morning. No, I'm not, and I'm sorry for not knocking on your bedroom door. I know we have our standing policy of walking into each other's homes without having to knock, but I should have known better than to take it that far. Please, forgive me, she asked awkwardly. Sure, just don't do that again, okay? Front door's one thing, bedroom door, that's an entirely different matter. Tsunade nodded and looked at Naruto, who was looking down in what seemed to be guilt and shame, who also responded in a somewhat subdued tone. Yeah, it's cool. Tsubaki, noticing his tone of voice, looked over at him and saw his guilt-ridden posture, and added, tell you what, I'm going to spend a little time getting dressed. I think you two could use a few minutes. Naruto looked at Tsubaki and smiled in gratitude, while Tsunade simply raised an eyebrow. Tsubaki went into the bedroom and closed the door once more, leaving Naruto alone. Tsunade turned her attention to Naruto and began to ask, so, why do we need a few M? Her eyes went wide as she was interrupted by Naruto's jumping towards her and clinging to her, his head buried in her chest. She noticed that her top was beginning to soak through, and she realized he was crying. I'm sorry, he mumbled through his tears and through his face buried into her bosom, though she could just make out what he was saying. I'm so sorry. Tsunade could only take a few moments to collect herself and wrap her own arms around his back in a clumsy attempt to comfort him. Naruto continued, what I said to you yesterday, it was wrong. It was cruel. I was angry, and I just started shooting my mouth off. Naruto, I understand, Tsunade interrupted him, it's alright. No, it's not alright. Naruto exclaimed indignantly, I had no right to say what I said to you. You had far more history with the pervy sage than I ever did, and I can only imagine how much it must have hurt you to get the news. Naruto continued crying into her gray GI top before adding a few moments later, please, forgive me. I forgave you the moment you said it, Tsunade responded immediately, and Naruto could hear her own voice cracking in her response. He looked up from her chest and saw that she had started crying as well. This caused more tears of his own to flow as he pulled away from her chest and wrapped the woman into another hug, this time with his head resting in the crook of her neck. Tsunade responded in kind, wrapping her own arms around him, bring one hand up to the back of his head and kissing his face while crying with him. I'm grieving, too, Naruto. I miss him just as much as you do, Tsunade admitted while they continued crying into each other. Neither of them noticed that Tsubaki's bedroom door was slightly ajar, and that she had been spying on their little moment. They both needed this, Tsubaki thought to herself as she quietly closed her door, a smile on her face at the touching moment that her love and her best friend shared with each other. With happy thoughts and a bright outlook, she proceeded to get dressed in a pair of brown feminine shorts with a lime green sleeveless versus neck form-fitting blouse that she had tucked into her waistline. Upon exiting the room, she saw that Naruto and Tsunade were both still crying in each other's arms. She came around the back of the couch and wrapped her own arms around the pair of them. The two of them seemed to instinctively include Tsubaki in their comforting embrace. After a few minutes, they all separated from each other, with Naruto and Tsubaki taking the seats that they'd had previously on the sofa while Tsunade was in the loveseat facing the couple. So, Naruto told me about what he'd said to you in your office after coming back from his last mission, Tsubaki began, addressing Tsunade. I told him a few things about Master Jiraiya's mission that he didn't know. Have you two managed to sort everything out? I think so, Tsunade replied before turning to Tsubaki's blonde companion, Naruto. Yeah, we're good. Good, I'm glad to hear that, Tsubaki responded. So what exactly brought you here at this time in the morning, Tsunade? Your request for leave. Ever since you returned to duty, you've never taken a sick day or even a personal day, so I wanted to come by and find out what was wrong. Tsunade smirked before adding with a teasing chuckle and a mischievous glint in her eye, and to let you know, I approve your request, wholeheartedly. Both Naruto and Tsubaki blushed at this. Tsubaki chose to respond sheepishly, well, while I appreciate that, that's really not the reason that I asked for the leave. She trailed off before adopting a more sober expression, I requested the leave mostly because I want to help Naruto through this in any way I can. Tsunade nodded understandingly at Tsubaki's answer, knowing that she was in a way uniquely qualified to help Naruto. Having lost her most precious person, her daughter, recently enough that the pain was still somewhat fresh, she knew, even better than Tsunade did, just what Naruto was going through, Naruto having lost the man who had been in many ways his most precious person. She could also see that, even beyond the obvious, Naruto and Tsubaki shared some kind of connection with each other. It wasn't something tangible that she could point at, but it was definitely there, and it was something remarkable to behold. She was brought out of her musings when Tsubaki brought her attention back to the moment, which brings up another question, Tsunade, where are Naruto's friends right now? He left your office yesterday morning, didn't he? Why was I the first one to make an attempt to help him with this? Because I didn't find him until late last night. Well, I can't speak for them, but, Tsunade turned her attention to Naruto, I can tell you that Shikamaru seemed affected by what happened once he got the news. He wasn't oblivious to how it would affect you, either. I've given him an assignment that will likely require your help, so that'll give him an excuse to find you sooner rather than later. He'll track you down in the next day or two. Naruto smiled softly, good old Shikamaru, he always was a stand-up guy. Tsunade smiled herself at that, glad for Naruto that he had at least one friend she knew he could count on. So anyway, do you two have plans for later? I'd like to maybe spend some time with you, she finished in a hopeful tone. Actually, Tsubaki answered, tonight we'll be going on our first date. I'm going to take Naruto out and about today to help him find some suitable date wear. Ah, I see, Tsunade answered knowingly, before continuing after a few moments' pause, by any chance, have either of you ever eaten at Phoenix Hall? You mean, the really ritzy restaurant in the Clan District? Naruto asked in surprise. I could never afford to eat at that place in a million years. Tsunade offered a knowing smile. I'll make reservations for the two of you at 7 tonight. Don't worry about a thing, she quickly added before Naruto could object. I'll take care of all the arrangements and the logistics. All you two need to do is show up. Thank you, Tsunade, Tsubaki answered happily. Once more before Naruto could object, we'd be honored to accept such a generous offer. Very well, then, Tsunade replied. Both of you have a wonderful day, and a wonderful evening as well. Naruto, come to my office in 3 days, there's the matter of Jiraiya's estate to be executed. What? Naruto asked in confusion. It means that he left a will, and named you an inheritor. He left you a few things. Oh, okay, he responded, becoming somber and subdued once more. Alright, then, you two, Tsunade said understandingly, I'll take my leave now. Naruto, I know you have Tsubaki, but if you ever need to talk to someone else about Jiraiya, my door's always open to you, okay? Naruto smiled and nodded. Thanks, Grandma. I'm still not that old, brat. You'd best remember that if you know what's good for ya, Tsunade retorted with a playful smirk. With that, she stood up and showed herself out. Naruto turned to Tsubaki, asking with a nervous edge, so, how are we going to pay for dinner at Phoenix Hall? Didn't you hear Tsunade? She said she'd handle the logistics. That means she's picking up tonight's tab. Oh, Naruto responded as understanding suddenly came to him. Well, why didn't she just say that? Tsubaki giggled before responding, come on, you. Let's get cleaned up again so that we can head out. Tsubaki had only added a pair of light white leather strap-on sandals to her outfit upon leaving her apartment. Naruto was wearing the white t-shirt and blue pants she'd found him in last night, along with his ninja sandals. Both of them were walking through the village streets, on their way to get Naruto some nicer clothes. Naruto had never imagined that he'd enjoy clothes shopping, but the idea of doing it with Tsubaki actually promised to be fun in his mind. Naruto suddenly adopted a forlorn expression when he and Tsubaki passed by the convenience store where he'd bought his popsicle the night prior. What's wrong? Tsubaki asked, sensing his depression. I bought my popsicle in that store last night. Tsubaki frowned thoughtfully at his response. Naruto, what's the significance of that popsicle? I'm making a fairly educated guess here that there's a story behind it. He smiled sadly and looked downward slightly as he began to explain. Yeah, there is. You see, when the pervy sage and I were looking for Grandma to bring her back here, one of the places we stopped at was Atofika town. There was a festival going on at the time, and I remembered seeing a man sharing a double-stick popsicle with his son. Tsubaki gasped inaudibly and widened her eyes as he continued. I wondered what it must be like to have a father that cared for you. And it really got me down that I couldn't even begin to guess. Well, Pervy Sage was also training me in the Rasengan at the time as well, so I left town at that point and went back to training. After a few hours, he'd found no trace of Tsunade there, so he came back and found me. Naruto's voice began to break, tears beginning to stream down his face as his smile, while still sad, became a fond one as well. He had one of those popsicles with him, and he shared it with me. That was the first time I had any kind of idea what it must have felt like to have a dad. Tsubaki began shedding tears of her own, turning Naruto towards herself and hugging him, wrapping her arms around his neck and resting his head on her shoulder while kissing his face. What a wonderful experience that must have been for you, she ventured in a faraway tone. After breaking the hug, Tsubaki suddenly had an idea. Grabbing his hand, she smiled and beckoned, come with me. He allowed her to lead him into the convenience store. As they entered, Tsubaki made a beeline for the freezer and started looking. Naruto just stared at her in confusion as she searched the contents of the freezer. After a few moments, her face lit up. Yes, there it is, she exclaimed as she opened the freezer and picked out a white-wrapped frozen treat. Looking at the wrapper, Naruto saw that it was called a lovesicle. Tsubaki then led him to the cash register and paid for the frozen goodie. After exiting the store, she led him to the bench where she found him last night. As they sat down, she opened the package in her hand and pulled out a double-stick popsicle that Naruto had never seen before. It was cherry red, and each half of the popsicle was heart-shaped, only connected at the very edge. Tsubaki split it and gave one half of it to Naruto, who took it with an intrigued smile. Naruto also noticed that connected to both halves of the lovesicle was a long string of candy. Do you know what the idea behind this is? Tsubaki asked, referring to the lovesicle they were sharing. Naruto shook his head in the negative. Tsubaki explained, well, the ends of the candy string are frozen inside each heart. When we're through eating the hearts, we start eating the candy string, and we meet in the middle, finishing the lovesicle with a kiss. Naruto smiled, I like this thing, already. Let's get started, then. They both started on their half of the lovesicle. Naruto noticed that the flavor of it was quite a bit richer and sweeter than the popsicles he and Jiraiya used to share. His tongue was flooded with sensations of a rich, sweet, tart, and concentrated raspberry flavor. After a few minutes, both had finished their hearts and started on the string. Tsubaki tried eating the string teasingly slowly, but Naruto just grinned and moved in to kiss his new girlfriend, the string into his mouth as he did so. While their lips were connected, Naruto pushed small amounts of the string into Tsubaki's mouth so that she could enjoy it, too. After 2 or so full minutes of having their lips locked together, they separated with a smile, Naruto breaking the string in the middle with a chomp before pulling away, both of them laughing together. They spent the rest of the morning just getting Naruto a few outfits that he could wear out that evening. Tsubaki liked surprises, so she helped him pick out several that he could choose from for the night, and even helped him pay for them. Once they were done, and Naruto had his outfits packed within several suit bags, they stored them into a sealing scroll that Tsubaki had brought along. Once finished, they decided to visit Ichiraku's for lunch, making their way with Tsubaki holding Naruto's arm in both of hers and leaning on it, both of them smiling wistfully. Along the way, they ran into someone that Tsubaki didn't expect to see. So, that's how it is for you, now, huh? Asked a bitter, angry female voice. Naruto and Tsubaki both turned to see Abara. Tsubaki asked in surprise. So you and him. Abara continued, her tone still angry, is he your little boy toy, now? Lady, who the hell do you think you are talking to her like that? Naruto objected loudly, and just who the hell do you? Tsubaki interrupted him by placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. Looking to Tsubaki, he saw her shaking her head at him. Don't bother, she explained, it's not worth it. And what's that supposed to mean, huh? Abara rounded on Tsubaki angrily. It means, Abara, Tsubaki retorted, that just because you're angry, hateful and miserable, it doesn't mean the rest of us have to be. What happened to you happened 16 years ago, I should know, because it happened to me as well, and it took just as much from me as it did from you. But that doesn't mean that I'm going to settle for the rest of my life being defined by that incident. As cruel as this may sound, get over it. Tsubaki began leading Naruto away, leaving a stunned and upset-looking Abara. She stopped briefly and turned around, addressing her former friend, and to answer your question, no, he's not my boy toy. He's the man I'm involved in a loving, healthy adult relationship with. And I'm happy with him. I'm happier with him than I've ever been with anyone else. Abara's eyes widened in shock at that admission. Tsubaki led Naruto away once more, this time not bothering to stop and look back. Had she looked back, she would have seen the single tear that Abara shed at her words, bringing forth not only old wounds, but also a few new ones upon reflecting on the truth of her former friend's hard words. Once they'd gotten to Ichiraku's, they had both all but forgotten their encounter with Abara. All smiles once they got there, Tsuki greeted them, and then cheered loudly when he saw the indicators that told him what Naruto and Tsubaki's current relationship was. Ayame came around at her father's cheering, and seeing what he saw, she not only cheered for them, but she jumped the counter and tackled the pair of them in a tight hug, congratulating them heartily. After lunch, Tsubaki and Naruto parted ways, with Tsubaki telling Naruto to pick her up at home at 6:30. Tsubaki explained to Naruto that she wanted to surprise him tonight, and that she also wanted him to surprise her in some way. With that, she left him to do what he was going to do while she got a few things done herself. Naruto went home and spent some time depositing his outfits there. Unsealing them from the scroll, he looked over them and decided on a particular ensemble: a pastel orange shirt, a black tie, a dark brown jacket, tan khaki slacks and black loafers. After situating himself, he left his apartment to go to the Yamanaka flower shop. If this was his first date, he was going to do it right, and he was going to do it by jumping in with both feet. When he arrived there, Ino was there to greet him. Good afternoon, welcome to the yamen, she smiled upon seeing who entered. Hi, Naruto, how are you? Hi, Ino, I'm good. How about you? He asked with a smile. I'm good, too. Hey listen, her smile dropped as she began to express condolences. We've all heard about what happened to Master Jiraiya. I'm so sorry. Thanks, Ino, Naruto said with a sad smile. I know now how you felt when you lost Asuma-sensei. His face dropped even more as he finished. Naruto, you don't blame yourself for that, do you? Ino asked in concern, her knowledge of the human mind and her ability to read people serving her well. At times, I do. I sometimes think that Asuma-sensei died because the people who killed him were after me, but I know that he wouldn't want me to blame myself for it. His smile returned as he continued, but I also know that he was protecting me as a comrade and as a fellow ninja of the leaf, and I know that he wouldn't want me blaming myself for it. Ino walked around to him and hugged him warmly, Naruto returning the sisterly hug she was giving him. Good, because you're right, he wouldn't want you blaming yourself, and none of us blame you, either. The fault lies with the people who want what's not rightfully theirs. Remember that, okay? You bet, Ino. Thanks, he answered before adding enthusiastically, but let's talk about what I came here for. Got it, Ino smiled at his enthusiasm, so what can I do for you? Well, if you must know, Naruto leaned in and began to speak conspiratorially, knowing how much Ino loved gossip. My new girlfriend and I are going on our first real date tonight, and I want to get her some flowers. Your girlfriend? Asked Ino excitedly, so you and Tsubaki really are. Hey, wait a minute. Naruto interrupted, how did you know it was Tsubaki? Oh, I don't know, she began with a smirk. It could be that I've seen the two of you walking back and forth down the street all morning, smiling like a couple of complete goofs in love and lost in your own little world. Naruto laughed sheepishly and scratched the back of his head. Yeah, I guess that's a pretty dead giveaway. Ino laughed with him as she addressed his needs. Okay, then. We're going to give you a dozen red roses. That'll show her just how much you love her, she added teasingly, though by the way you two were acting with each other earlier, I don't think you need to show her. Naruto simply smiled and nodded. Ino sped away preparing an immaculate bouquet of roses for Naruto, adding several pink and white ones in with the dozen red that she originally had in mind. Naruto was very impressed with what Ino had produced for him. It further made his afternoon when she gave him a discount. She only charged him for the dozen red, and threw the extra pink and white roses into the bouquet on the house. After paying her and thanking her for her help, Naruto went on his way, heading back home to make final preparations for that night. Having spent most of his afternoon making sure he looked the best he could for his new girlfriend, he was satisfied with the end result. The biggest hurdle of it all was using the various gels and products so that he could smooth out his hair and slick it back. Deciding to forego his usual wild, rugged look for a more sophisticated image tonight, he had spent almost 2 hours just trying to tame his hair. Surprisingly, even to himself, he never got frustrated with the process, or with himself or his hair. He believed every painstaking minute to be worth the final outcome so that he could look his very best for the woman he'd fallen head over heels in love with. And now, at 6:30 on the dot, Naruto was at Tsubaki's front door, knocking on it to announce his arrival, his bouquet of roses in hand, ready to give to her. The door opened to reveal one of the most breathtaking sights Naruto had ever beheld. Naruto gasped and went wide-eyed at the visage of beauty before him, a flush creeping across his face. There she was, the woman he loved, completely made over in a way that he had to see to believe. Several locks of her hair were pinned to the side of her head in an effect that made her own hair look like tapered ribbons, while the remaining strands were clipped back across the top of her scalp towards the back. The rest of her hair cascaded down from those bindings in a series of waves and curls, showing off a fresh perm and styling. Her face was made up in very earthy tones. She wore a blush that gave her cheeks a reddish-brown color and blended perfectly into her skin tone. Her lipstick was a semi-gloss that was a darker reddish-brown, with the red showing through a little more, accentuating her closed-mouth smile. Her eyeshadow was also a darker brown that faded perfectly into the rest of her complexion and the blush on her cheeks, making the brown in her eyes sparkle and come to life. Her mascara gave her lashes the extra fullness that brought a very sultry, sensual quality to her overall appearance. This was to say nothing of her apparel for the evening. She was wearing a knit tunic dress of a medium, light brown that was just a few shades lighter than her hair. The dress was too thin to be called a sweater, but had the appearance of one, being knit from what looked like wool and cotton. The dress itself started just off Tsubaki's shoulders, with an oversized fold-over collar, held in place with 3 buttons over her. The sleeves were long, ending at her wrists, and the garment had been fitted for her silhouette, showing off her very womanly curves and supple bust. The hem of her dress ended at mid-thigh in a tapered layer pattern. She was wearing black sheer stockings which flowed down into dark brown, black leather high-top boots, giving her a couple of inches height advantage over Naruto. Tsubaki, upon seeing Naruto's reaction, appearance, and the bouquet in his hands, smiled even wider, a blush crossing her own features as well. "Hello, my love," Tsubaki greeted him warmly. "Huh," Naruto responded dumbly. Tsubaki raised an intrigued eyebrow and smirked, waving her hand in front of his face. "Naruto. You in there?" Wah?" Naruto asked, shaking his head before blushing even more deeply, feeling somewhat embarrassed at his loss of attention. He laughed embarrassedly and explained, "Sorry, it's just that you're so beautiful right now, I couldn't believe my eyes." Tsubaki's smile widened into a grin as her eyes welled up, touched as she was by Naruto's sincerity of her beauty at that moment. "Why, thank you. You look quite dashing, yourself, tonight." "Thanks. These are for you," Naruto responded, offering the bouquet to Tsubaki. Tsubaki took the bouquet with a smile on her face. "Thank you so much. Just give me a second to put these in some water, and then, we'll be off." Naruto nodded, waiting while Tsubaki put the bouquet into a vase. After a couple of minutes, Tsubaki returned, locking up her apartment and taking Naruto's arm. A few minutes after that found the Leaf's newest couple walking down the street, drawing quite a few stares, and more than one double take at the very good-looking couple. "Boss, that you?" A voice very familiar to Naruto was heard asking. Naruto turned in the direction of the voice. "Hey there, Konohamaru. How are ya? Haven't seen you around in a while." "I'm good," the young Sarutobi greeted before his tone became more subdued. "Hey, boss, I'm sorry about Pervy Sage. I know he meant a lot to you." Naruto nodded and smiled softly. "Thanks, buddy, I appreciate that. Say, how's that new technique I taught you coming along?" "Well, I'm working to get stage 3 mastered right now, but I just can't seem to get it," Konohamaru answered in resigned frustration. "Yeah, that one was tough for me, too. I'll give you a tip, use a shadow clone to gather the chakra at first, and that'll at least allow you to make it battle ready. You can work on mastering it later." Konohamaru's face lit up with sudden understanding. "Kami, why didn't I think of that?" He smiled and said, "Thanks, Naruto. Oh, and is this pretty lady you know," he held out his pinky finger, "girlfriend? Didn't know you were into older women, there, boss," he finished teasingly. Tsubaki laughed warmly at Konohamaru's reference to her, while Naruto grinned proudly. "As a matter of fact, yes, she is my girlfriend and I couldn't be happier. Konohamaru Sarutobi, meet Tsubaki Kenpi." "It's a pleasure, ma'am." Konohamaru bowed politely before the woman on Naruto's arm, "and I must say that Naruto has very good taste." "Well, thank you, Konohamaru," Tsubaki bowed back with a smile, "and it's always nice to receive genuine compliments from such a handsome young man as yourself." Konohamaru just laughed embarrassedly while scratching the back of his head in a very Naruto-like gesture. Naruto interjected, "Well, see you around, Konohamaru. We've got a reservation to keep. See you later, boss. Have a good night, you too," he exclaimed, waving at the pair. The both waved back and continued on their way. As they were walking along, Tsubaki remembered something. "So what's that new technique you taught him?" Naruto leaned in closer, answering quietly, "The Rasengan." "Really?" she asked in surprise. "Yeah," Naruto responded before chuckling, "It's funny. When I was explaining it to him, he thought I was showing him a pervy ninjutsu." Tsubaki laughed heartily at that, finding such a situation to be quite amusing. She could picture Konohamaru's letdown when he found out that Naruto wasn't teaching him a pervy ninjutsu, only to perk up when he saw what a technique such as the Rasengan was capable of. They continued walking along towards Phoenix Hall, continuing to draw gaping stares the whole way. Once they had arrived, they stopped and took in the 4-story building that housed the restaurant that was so popular with the clans and with visiting foreign dignitaries. The architecture was of a classic pagoda style, the facade painted in red, black and gold. Each ascending level of the structure got smaller, the smallest being at the very top. As soon as the staff caught sight of them, they were immediately shown in and brought before none other than Shuza Akamichi. "Ah, good evening, Naruto, Tsubaki," he greeted them both with a hearty smile. "Hi, Mr. Shuza," Naruto greeted back with a friendly grin of his own. Shuza nodded and continued, "Welcome to our fine establishment. Lady Tsunade has already made all of the arrangements this evening, so if you would, please follow me to your private dining room." Naruto and Tsubaki raised their eyebrows and smiled in pleasant surprise. They followed Shuza up 3 flights of stairs, ascending to the top floor. As they walked down the crimson-paneled, lowly lit hallway, they could smell a kitchen to their right, the heavenly scents of delectable delicacies wafting out and inflaming their appetites. The hallway ended at a large set of double doors. Shuza opened one of the doors and escorted the 2 of them into the room beyond. The room itself was lit entirely by candlelight. The walls themselves were crimson-paneled just like the hallway outside. Bouquets and collections of flowers were scattered along the walls and in the corners of the room, and the table was set for 2, with a single lit candle in the center. Soft music could be heard through the loudspeakers inside the walls and ceiling. Both of them grinned widely at what lay before them. This room was set up for the 2 of them alone. "Welcome to what we like to call the romantic getaway room," Shuza explained. "Tonight's selection will be served in several rounds: appetizers, salad, entrees and sides, and dessert. The appetizers we've prepared for the 2 of you are stuffed peppers, dango, and edamame. The salad will be a mixed greens variety. The entree courses will consist of herb-roasted pheasant, seasonal grilled vegetables, Akamichi-style barbecued pork, chicken fried and peppered rice, and of course for Naruto, miso ramen courtesy of Kyuki Ichiraku. Dessert will consist of several fruit pies." "Awesome!" exclaimed Naruto, while Tsubaki giggled at his enthusiasm. "For beverages, we'll be providing you with a bottle of the Land of Honey's finest honey and plum sake, 3 pitchers of hot green tea, and several different fruit juice blends." "That sounds wonderful, Shuza." "Thank you," Tsubaki responded while Naruto nodded. One last thing," Shuza added, as he made the ram hand seal. A second later, the walls faded away, leaving the room exposed to the outside as Shuza began to explain. The walls have several seals in them that allow them to become transparent on the inside. This way, you can dine in complete privacy while having a panoramic view of the village from the outside. You'll appreciate it a lot more once the sun finishes setting, believe me. Tsubaki and Naruto smiled wondrously at the degree of service they were being given. Shuza bowed and informed them that they would be bringing in each course of the meal shortly. Shuza then left to bring in their drinks. Conversation between the 2 of them centered around the 2 of them getting to know things about each other. Both had agreed that while they knew each other, they didn't know a lot of things about each other, so they decided to spend their time filling in the gaps and details that gave who they were as individuals their context. Naruto spent some time telling her about his childhood, and also about some of the missions he undertook before he'd left with Jiraiya to train. Tsubaki was surprised to learn that his legendary Nindo of never going back on his word, and doing whatever it takes to protect his precious people, was influenced in large part by none other than Zabuza Momochi and his associate, Haku. She was even further surprised when he told her about he had beaten Kiba in the Chunin exam final round preliminaries with a severe handicap that he didn't even realize he'd had at the time. There were several other amusing stories he'd told her as well, such at the time where he and his squad tried to get a peek at Kakashi's face beneath the mask, or the time where he had to stay on top of Gamabunta's head for a whole day in order for him to agree to let him use his contract. There were some more serious stories as well, such as when he and Jiraiya had found Tsunade and fought off Orochimaru, and the Sasuke retrieval mission, where all of his comrades walked away with injuries. Tsubaki couldn't help but remember back to when she'd seen him in the ICU after that incident, bloodied and banged up. She'd almost shed a tear as that memory resurfaced, but managed to keep it down, doing all she could to make sure that tonight was as happy and joyful for Naruto as possible. She'd also shared several stories of her own life, How she'd graduated from the academy during wartime under the 4th Hokage's watch, how she'd been forced to leave shinobi duty once she'd gotten pregnant with Kasumi, her life leading up to Kasumi's graduation from the academy, and the challenges that came with raising a child alone. Naruto hadn't realized just how challenging Tsubaki's life had been. It was different from his own, but the demands placed upon her as a widow and a single parent were overwhelming without someone to help her share the responsibilities. Her friendship with Obara had solidified and deepened during that time, as they both would help each other out with their daughters when one or the other of them needed a break. Naruto couldn't help but think that it was truly tragic how angry and bitter Obara had ended up, but Tsubaki had also told him that Obara, in a sense, had put herself into the situation she was in. The fact of the matter was that Obara was always a spiteful person by nature, someone who needed something to be angry at, lest she turn that anger on herself. Naruto only hoped that Obara could one day let her anger go and find something, or someone, worth living for. They learned about each other's hobbies. Naruto had expanded his hobbies beyond tasting and comparing ramen in the last several years to include gardening, taijutsu training with Rock Lee, and various other physical activities. Tsubaki's hobbies were more mental than Naruto's were, such as solving puzzles and playing mind teasers. With the exception of Lee's extreme training, the two of them resolved to engage in some of their hobbies together, as well as finding new mutual hobbies that they could enjoy. Each course of the dinner seemed to taste better than the previous one. The sake and tea also complemented the meal quite nicely. Shuza had actually taken it upon himself to serve them the meal, and had otherwise made himself as scarce as possible, giving the couple the greatest degree of privacy while ensuring that their every need was met. As the meal went on, the two noticed that the sun had set, and the view from the high room was indeed spectacular, enhancing the already romantic atmosphere by allowing them to eat under the stars. The way that they were looking at each other was not lost on their host. "If you like," Shuza offered, making his presence known, "this door does lock from the inside." "Why?" Tsubaki asked warily, though she raised a bemused eyebrow. "Well," Shuza chuckled before finishing, "let's just say that some have been known to use this room for other things besides eating." "Oh," Tsubaki responded with a blush, I see." Naruto responded with his usual sheepish laugh while scratching the back of his head, sporting a blush of his own. "Well, I'll leave you two with the option," and with that, Shuza left the room, leaving the two of them to their own devices. Deciding that such activities, at least for now, were best kept within the privacy of one of their homes, and the comfort of a bed, the two prepared to exit the restaurant, only to be stopped by Shuza, who had a very nice camera around his neck. "A moment, you two," he began, "Lady Tsunade asked me to take a picture of you two, here. She wanted one, and she'll also pay to have duplicates made for each of you." The two of them smiled and nodded, allowing Shuza to situate them into a loving couple position. Naruto was standing proud and tall, while Tsubaki was leaning against Naruto from the left-hand side. Naruto's left arm was around her waist, while Tsubaki's right arm was around her shoulders, and her left arm was around his front, resting against his chest. Her head was turned to face the camera, and both of them sported happy smiles. Once Shuza had taken the picture, he told them that they would be ready by tomorrow morning and delivered to Tsunade's office. After this, they took their leave, thanking Shuza for the wonderful meal on the way out, and walking through the streets, making their way to one of the village's public parks. As they entered the park, Tsubaki gave a surprised squeak, immediately followed by an excited laugh as Naruto had picked her up without warning, scooping her into a bridal carry. Naruto proceeded to carry her through the park, showing off his lady to any and all present with a mile-wide grin on his face. As they continued through the park, Naruto asked, "So, how am I doing as a boyfriend, right now?" "Well, let's see," Tsubaki began, assuming a mock thoughtful expression, bringing her finger to her lips. "You dressed in a very sharp outfit for me, you brought me a beautiful bouquet of roses, you've taken me to a 5-star restaurant and fed me a spectacular meal, you're showing the world at large that you're proud to be with me. I'd say, you're doing wonderful, Naruto," Tsubaki answered, kissing him on the cheek with a smile. "In fact, I'd say you're doing perfectly." "That's good to know," Naruto replied with a grin. "And how am I doing as a girlfriend, by your estimation?" "Best I could ever ask for," Naruto exclaimed in his simple and direct manner, bringing forth a warm giggle from Tsubaki. Naruto. Another voice familiar to Naruto asked, bringing them out of their world and back into their surroundings. Hey, Iruka-sensei. Naruto greeted his big brother figure. Hey, how are you? I've been looking everywhere for you since last night. Sorry about that, Iruka, Tsubaki responded, he's been with me the whole time. Okay, actually, about that, what's the deal with you two here? I'm his girlfriend, now. Iruka, dumbfounded, looked from Tsubaki to Naruto, who nodded, confirming her declaration. Iruka shook his head, as though trying to shake something off, before smiling, well, congratulations to the two of you, then. Though I have to confess to being a bit surprised, Naruto, I would have thought you'd be pursuing Sakura, still. Naruto simply grinned as he asked, Sakura who? Iruka laughed at that, well, it's good to see that you're with someone who seems to care for you a great deal. There was a pause, before Iruka spoke up, hey Tsubaki, do you mind if I steal him away for a couple of minutes? It'll be quick. Sure, Tsubaki answered, having a pretty good guess as to what he wanted to talk to Naruto about. Naruto, can you, a sappy, sweet pout crossed her features, carry me over to that bench over there? Anything for you, my princess, Naruto answered just as sweetly, causing Iruka to roll his eyes and smirk, as well. Naruto carried Tsubaki over to the bench that she indicated and gently and carefully sat her comfortably on it before walking back over to Iruka. So, what did you want to talk to me about, Iruka-sensei? Well, I heard about what happened to Master Jiraiya after you turned me down for ramen, yesterday, Iruka began in a subdued tone. I wanted to see how you were doing, but, his tone perked up a bit, well, for the most part, you seem to be doing okay, right now. Yeah, I am, Naruto responded, Tsubaki's been amazing. I'm glad she found me last night. About Tsubaki, Naruto frowned at Iruka's slightly wary tone, are you sure you know what you're doing? What do you mean? Naruto asked, confused. Well, I don't want to come off as though I don't approve, or that I don't support you or anything, but, isn't she a little old for you? Naruto adopted a thoughtful frown before nodding once, understanding Iruka's concern before beginning to diffuse it. She asked me the same thing earlier this morning. Iruka's eyebrows raised in surprise at this, she was actually concerned that she might hold me back in some way. Honestly, Iruka-sensei, she knows me, I know her, I can't really explain it, but I look into her eyes, and I know exactly what's going on in her head and in her heart. It's so strange because she does exactly the same thing with me. Iruka hummed in surprise before continuing, well, as long as you're okay, that's my main concern. And I'm glad you're happy. I don't think Master Jiraiya would want to see you down. He spoke of you so fondly, in fact, he once told me that he thought of you as his grandson. Naruto responded, you know it's funny, I thought of him more like a father than a grandfather, but yeah, I know he wouldn't want me to be down. Thanks for checking on me, Iruka-sensei. Sure thing, Naruto, Iruka responded warmly, now, why don't you get back to your lady friend, over there? You bet. Good night. Good night. Both of them went their separate ways, Naruto to retrieve Tsubaki and continue on his way, Iruka on his way back home in the opposite direction. Naruto gently scooped Tsubaki back up and proceeded to take her home. So, what did he want? Oh, he just wanted to see how I was doing with things, Naruto began, and he also wanted to make sure I knew what I was doing with, well, us. Oh, Tsubaki responded, not at all surprised, so, what were his concerns? Same as yours, actually, Naruto answered directly, that in itself seemed to calm his nerves a bit, and he's glad that I'm in good spirits with you. Tsubaki smiled, that's good. I'm glad to hear that. As soon as they left the park, Naruto lowered Tsubaki to her feet at her behest. She took his arm in both of hers, once more hugging it to herself, as they went on their way back towards her home. She looked on curiously as Naruto suddenly stopped. Following his gaze, she saw a large stuffed frog in a shop window. Naruto unconsciously walked over to the window and put his hand on it. Tsubaki walked up beside him a few moments later, put her arm around his shoulders and asked concernedly, are you okay? Naruto closed his eyes and sighed, before nodding slowly, remaining quiet. Tsubaki brought her other hand up to his face and guided his gaze to hers. Naruto, talk to me about it, she implored softly. Naruto began, the first time Pervy Sage had ramen with me, he chuckled as he looked back at the stuffed frog and continued, he stuck me with the bill, by substituting himself with a big stuffed frog just like this one. Did he really? Tsubaki asked with a laugh, the prank master from hell got pranked. Wow, I haven't been called that in a while, but yeah, Naruto laughed as well, smiling fondly at the memory. His smile faded as Tsubaki saw fresh hurt in his eyes. I wanted him to keep watching over me. I wanted him to see me become the Hokage, but I only ended up showing him the worst, most uncool side of me. Sensing that he wasn't done, Tsubaki remained quiet and attentive. Naruto closed his eyes as a few tears made their way out of his ducts. He sighed and continued, I have so many regrets, Tsubaki. I wish I'd listened to him more. I wish I hadn't blown my top at some of the training he gave me. His voice broke as he finished, I wish I'd been a better student to him. Tsubaki immediately wrapped him into a comforting hug and kissed his cheek, effectively interrupting his lament. Naruto wrapped his arms around her in response, weeping silently as she rubbed his back and the back of his head comfortingly. After a few moments, Tsubaki pulled back, cupping one side of his face with her hand, stray tears of her own flowing down her cheeks. Honey, listen to me, Tsubaki began, after I was made Tsunade's apprentice, I was in Tsunade's office when Master Jiraiya gave most of his reports to her about you, and he only had good things to say. An involuntary sob and hiccup came from Naruto's throat as he smiled at her words, touched by them. She continued, he had so much faith in you, and he considered you his greatest success. It wasn't the fourth Hokage who was his favorite student, it was you, because you're so much like him, in the areas that matter. You have his soul, you have his courage, and you've inherited his will. He truly believed that you would one day be a great Hokage, and I believe that too. Naruto gasped as his eyes went wide. Tsubaki smiled and pressed on, Master Jiraiya will always be watching over you. Even now, he's watching from somewhere. Her tone became a little lighter as she finished, I'll bet he's even doing research right now, and you and I are the current subjects of his research. Naruto couldn't help but laugh heartily at that, somehow, I wouldn't be surprised. Tsubaki laughed with him for a few moments before the laughter died down. Naruto, in good spirits once more, smiled serenely and softly responded, thank you, princess. I needed that. She smiled and kissed him once more, this time on the lips. Pulling away with a smirk, she offered in a sultry tone, so, what do you say we go back to my place and honor his memory by giving him some research material, Naruto smirked back and responded by kissing her once more as Tsubaki teleported them both in a swirl of leaves back to her home, in eager anticipation of the night's impending delights, unaware of the two who had been observing them from the shadows. Hinata Hyuga didn't know what to think or do. She had seen Naruto sitting on that bench last night crying silently to himself. She was distraught, the source of her strength was faltering, and without it, she didn't know what to do. So she had done what she'd always done, silently encourage him in her thoughts. Naruto, you can pull through this, you can. You need to, I need you too. She had been more than shocked when Lady Tsunade's newest apprentice came to him and offered him all the comfort she could. And her heart broke when she saw Tsubaki kiss Naruto with such passionate force. To her surprise, she saw Naruto completely break down and allow himself to fall into that woman's embrace. She left after she saw that, unable to take any more. She couldn't take seeing her strength in such a frail, weak state, nor could she stomach the idea of him in another woman's arms. He was supposed to have an indomitable spirit. How could his strength fail him like that? Didn't he realize that she needed him? Seeing him again tonight brought some relief to her, though her distress was now replaced with some jealousy. She was glad to see him in better spirits, but why wasn't it her that was on his arm instead of that woman? She was so much older than he was, so what was she after in pursuing a man so much younger? Why did that woman want the man she loved, her strength? After they had vanished from the storefront where the stuffed frog was, Hinata began to make her way, intent on confronting the woman about her relationship with her hero at the soonest possible opportunity. She knew that she would likely be at Tsunade's office at some point, and she had some business with the Hokage anyway. There was a good chance that they'd bump into each other there sometime tomorrow. Sakura Haruno walked back to her home as well, having observed Naruto and Tsubaki from a different vantage point than Hinata. She found herself feeling quite angry at what she'd seen. Who did Naruto think he was, letting Tsubaki Kenpi of all people hang all over him like that? Who did Tsubaki think she was, thinking she had the right to hang all over him? Tsubaki, the woman who had cost Sakura her apprenticeship with the Hokage. Tsubaki, the woman who had estranged her from her teammate. Tsubaki, the woman who had taken both her teammate and her apprenticeship from her. Who did she think she was? Sakura had found herself growing more and more frustrated and angrier at the world now that her vent had been taken from her. She couldn't hit anyone else, nobody would have taken it the way Naruto did, and from what she'd learned about the injuries she inflicted on him, nobody else could take it, either. This caused her anger and jealousy to be tinged with regret as well. What am I thinking? I don't have the right to inflict those kinds of injuries on anybody. But I'm still majorly pissed off at the two of them for everything that's happened to me, cha. Her feelings conflicting with what she knew to be right in her head, she realized that she would need someone to talk to about this. Ino. No, Ino wouldn't understand. Kakashi-sensei. No, he simply wouldn't care. Would Lady Tsunade take the time to listen to me? I'll stop by her office tomorrow. Besides, if Tsubaki had ulterior motives about getting me removed from Naruto's room, and for having my apprenticeship terminated, she needs to know about it. She continued on her way home, resolving to stop by the Hokage's office tomorrow to talk about her feelings and express her concerns to Lady Tsunade, and hopefully be able to confront Tsubaki about this as well. Chapter 7. Some can see, some can't. Tsubaki's eyes slowly opened as she awoke from her slumber. Naruto's peaceful, content, sleeping face was the first thing that came into her vision. A smile filled with all the love in the world involuntarily crossed her lips. Her eyes became misty as she stared at him through half-lidded eyes, as though he was the only thing that existed to her at that moment. Do you have any idea at all how much I love you? She asked in her thoughts as she watched him sleep. Do you know what it is that you do to me? Do you know how overwhelmed I am with love and joy whenever I'm around you? It hasn't even been 2 days, and already I can't imagine life without you. Even now, I'm just so happy watching you sleep peacefully. She brought a gentle hand up to his face, brushing aside a few stray locks of hair and gently caressing his cheek with her fingertips, just lightly enough so as to not disturb his sleep. You're the most precious and wonderful soul I've ever encountered. You have such a bright and amazing future, and you don't even realize the full extent of it. But I can see it. I can see that you, Naruto Uzumaki, you'll change the entire world in ways we can't even fathom. Your legend will go so far beyond the title of Hokage. You'll accomplish so many great things, and you'll also bear such agonizing trials and struggles, and I'll be right there at your side with you through all of them. I'll celebrate every achievement with you, and I'll struggle through every trial right beside you, giving you what strength and support I can every step of the way. I'm so honored and humbled that you'd want me as your partner through life. Tsubaki continued tracing her fingertips across his face and through his hair. Naruto, you're perfect in every way to me. That wonderful, handsome face, those exquisite whisker marks, the magnificent blue of your eyes, those golden locks of hair. Even your flaws are perfect, the way you stubbornly stand your ground, even when you probably shouldn't, your overflowing passion and intensity, that even sometimes robs you of good common sense, the fact that you're honest to a fault. But it's those very flaws in conjunction with your strengths that enable you to give so many people so much hope. So many things about you remind me of the fourth Hokage. You have his courage, you have his magnificent ability to inspire everyone around you just by being there, you even look quite a bit like him. She narrowed her eyes as she pondered that thought. I wonder. Could it be? She found herself studying his features for a brief moment, comparing them to her own mental image of Minato Namikaze. The resemblance was startling, to say the least. Could Naruto and the fourth be related somehow? Anyway, it doesn't matter to me, she thought contentedly as her smile returned, putting the matter aside for the moment. You're amazing just the way you are. I wonder what time it is, anyway. As she looked around, she saw the light of the waning moon, telling her that dawn was about to approach. After half an hour of just caressing his face and hair with her fingertips as he slept, she decided to get up and get her day started. As she got out of bed, she was reminded of last night's intimacy by the fact that she was wearing nothing but her garter belt and black silk stockings. She smiled with a blush at the memory before heading to her bathroom and freshening herself up to start her day. After she was done freshening up and applying light makeup, she dressed herself in a cream-colored V-neck blouse and crimson knee-length skirt, not unlike what she would normally wear when on duty at the hospital. The main differences were that her blouse had no buttons, and her skirt didn't cling to her hips and legs but flowed freely instead. She noticed that the dawn's light was beginning to peek in through the window. Looking over at Naruto, she decided to let him sleep for now. She quietly left the room, leaving the door slightly ajar, and went into the kitchen to begin preparing breakfast. After preparing the same meal she'd made for herself and Naruto yesterday, she ate her share and placed the rest in her oven on a warm setting. Knowing that Tsunade would want to get an early start on her day, especially with the pictures that Shuza said would be delivered that morning, she thought to go ahead and get hers and Naruto's copies as soon as possible. She quickly wrote a note for Naruto, letting him know where she was and what she was doing. Once she was finished, she folded the note, wrote his name on it, and quietly went back into the bedroom. Leaving the note on her pillow so that he would see it once he woke up, she looked at his sleeping face once more and smiled lovingly again. She leaned across the bed and gently kissed his cheek before leaning up to his ear and whispering, "I love you." Naruto's face adopted a ghost of a smile as he continued to sleep peacefully. Tsubaki pulled away from the bed and left the room, this time closing the door behind her. Upon leaving her room, she put her white lace-up sandals on and left her home, heading in the direction of the Hokage Tower. As she walked along, she couldn't help but feel that she was being watched. Not seeing anyone, she kept an eye peeled, listening for any sounds her potential tail might make to reveal her presence. Just outside Hokage Tower, the person tailing her made their presence known. "Miss Tsubaki." She heard a young female voice call out with cold anger from her left. She turned to see none other than Hinata Hyuga, glaring at her coldly. "Lady Hinata," Tsubaki greeted cordially yet warily, "Good morning, is there anything I can do for you?" "Why?" the young Hyuga asked in response, her anger still cold but more noticeable. Tsubaki narrowed her eyes at the girl, able to guess what Hinata was asking. Not letting her off the hook, she asked, "Why what, exactly? Why are you with Naruto?" Hinata spat out, this time through gritted teeth. "Excuse me," Tsubaki asked warningly, sending an indignant glare of her own in Hinata's direction. Hinata dropped all pretense of calm control and began to raise her voice, "What's your game? What do you want from him? Why were you with him last night and the night before?" "I don't believe that's any of your business, young lady," Tsubaki answered firmly before proceeding on her way. Hinata's voice stopped her once more. "I won't just give him up to you, and I'll fight you for him if I must," she began to cry out. Tsubaki immediately cut her off, her own voice rising in volume, "Now you listen here, and you listen good. Naruto is not your possession, nor is he a trophy to be fought over. He is a man who is free to choose who he wants to be with, and I will not engage in stupid, petty, childish games like this with you, or anyone else. I love him." Hinata exclaimed furiously, "I've loved him far longer than you ever have. And I love him more than you ever will." "Do you really?" Tsubaki asked in a challenging tone, "Then tell me this, where were you when he needed someone to care for him and comfort him? If you know I was with him 2 nights ago, you must have seen us." Hinata began to shrink in on herself. "I was, watching from the shadows," she straightened up and said with a little more steel, "I was silently encouraging him to remain strong. And just what good did your so-called, silent encouragement, do for him? What, did you think he'd somehow, be able to sense your, encouragement, by detecting your chakra or something? You have the nerve to ask me why I was with him. Then you answer me, Hinata Hyuga, right now, why weren't you?" Hinata began to break down, I couldn't. "You couldn't what, Hinata?" Tsubaki asked, lowering the volume of her inquiry to a calm, but straightforward tone. "You couldn't reach out to him. You couldn't simply let him know that you cared. How long were you there for, watching him before I arrived?" Hinata's eyes gazed downward, unable to look Tsubaki in the eye any longer. She answered meekly, "About half an hour." "Half an hour?" Tsubaki asked incredulously, "And in all that time, you couldn't offer him a word of comfort?" You couldn't give him a shoulder to cry on, or just someone to talk to. How could you claim to love him if you would just stand there and watch him suffer? I wouldn't have known what to do. Hinata yelled out, her voice breaking as she broke out into tears of anguish and frustration. Naruto is my strength. He's the reason I can push forward despite everything. His strength was failing him. I didn't know what to do. She trailed off, her cries turning into sobs. Tsubaki simply stood there, feeling pity for the poor girl before her. Hinata, she called softly in an attempt to get the weeping girl's attention. Hinata, look at me. Hinata continued to weep at her own powerlessness, unresponsive to Tsubaki's call. Tsubaki, however, would not allow the girl to leave her presence without facing this issue. Hinata Hyuga, you look at me. Tsubaki ordered sternly, invoking the stern mother she'd had to be at times with Kasumi when she was still alive. At such a tone, Hinata opened her eyes, brought her gaze upwards and gave Tsubaki her undivided attention. Seeing that she had it, Tsubaki began, you need to walk away from this having learned something, young lady. Love is not selfish, and you have in essence been using Naruto for your own selfish ends. Using him as your strength is not only unfair to him, but cruel as well. Hinata gasped at Tsubaki's words. Tsubaki continued, when you love someone, you don't think of what they can do for you, you think of what you can do for them. Naruto has just lost one of the most important and influential men in his life. Jiraiya was like a father to him, and the fact that he's an orphan makes that loss infinitely more devastating and painful to him. And you could only think of your need, for him to be strong. What about Naruto's needs? The simple fact of the matter is that Naruto doesn't need to be encouraged, or remain strong, he needs to grieve. He needs people around him who will comfort him, even more so now, considering that he probably won't have much time to grieve over this, what with everything going on. Hinata sniffled, absorbing the hard truth behind Tsubaki's words. Tsubaki pressed on, Hinata, if you loved Naruto, you would have somehow known what to say or do when you saw him 2 nights ago. Even if you didn't, that wouldn't have mattered, you would have approached him and said or done, something, anything. If you truly loved him, the only thing that would have mattered to you was the fact that Naruto was in need. I can see that you admire him greatly, and I can see that you, in a sense, worship him. But that's not love. Love isn't about you, it's about the object of your love. Hinata, that's something you have to grasp if you want to have any chance of finding love, whether with Naruto or with anyone else. I hope you take this to heart, I really do. Tsubaki proceeded once more to make her way inside Hokage Tower, but she was stopped one last time by a sad, yet determined Hinata's voice once again. Do you love him? Hinata asked, the need to know quite clear. Tsubaki turned to her and answered unashamedly and with deep conviction, yes I do, Hinata. I love Naruto Uzumaki with all that I am, and I'd shout it out without shame or hesitation to the entire village from the top of Hokage Mountain. Hinata seemed to ponder her answer. In her heart, she knew that she could never give such a strong and bold answer to that question. Looking at the woman she had just confronted, she replied, please forgive me. I won't give you any more trouble over this issue. I wish you and Naruto all the happiness the world can give you. Tsubaki smiled at the girl in response, thank you, Hinata. I hope that you're able to find the same kind of love that Naruto and I have come to share, as well. Hinata nodded with a sad smile of her own and went on her way. Tsubaki proceeded once more into Hokage Tower, this time making it to Tsunade's office without further incident. Tsunade couldn't help the satisfied smirk that accompanied her joyful smile as she listened to Tsubaki's account of her date with Naruto last night. The moment she saw Tsubaki walk into her office with an ecstatic smile on her face, she began to grill the younger woman, wanting to know every single little detail of the date. Tsubaki did not disappoint, though she gave just enough subtle information about their activities after they'd returned to her home to make the busty Hokage blush, while not actually revealing anything. Tsunade felt let down at being teased in such a way, though she was very happy for Naruto and Tsubaki. As expected, the pictures taken by Shuza had arrived in the middle of their conversation. The package consisted of 3 glossy 11 by 14 prints, one for Tsunade, one each for Naruto and Tsubaki, all of them already framed. Tsunade let Tsubaki have the negatives. Tsubaki was quite happy with the way they turned out. Tsunade, not having seen them, gasped with wide eyes at the picture. Naruto and Tsubaki looked like a magnificent couple, and even the picture told her that the two were very much in love. She noted that this was the first photograph of Naruto that she'd seen where he looked directly at the camera with his eyes open, and he looked genuinely happy. When 8 o'clock rolled around, Shikamaru Nara and Sakura Haruno entered her office with some standard reports. Both of them chanced upon the pictures that Tsunade and Tsubaki were fawning over. Shikamaru raised an eyebrow and gave a knowing smirk, nodding at Tsubaki, who smiled in response to him. Sakura, however, had already felt angry upon seeing Tsubaki in Tsunade's office, and the picture seemed to make her even angrier. Both Tsubaki and Tsunade noticed this. Tsunade decided to deal with the issue right then and there, asking pointedly, "Sakura, is there a problem?" Sakura turned to regard the Hokage. "Yes, milady. Based on Tsubaki Kenpi's current relationship with Naruto Uzumaki, I have reason to believe that her motives for reporting my actions to you were less than professional or objective, and I'm asking for an inquiry into her actions that led up to me being dismissed as your apprentice." Tsubaki allowed her head to fall into her hand and shook her head, sighing exasperatedly. "Not another one," she groaned in a deadpan. Tsunade regarded Tsubaki curiously. "Another one." Tsubaki turned her gaze to the blonde. "This is the third time, by the third person, in less than 24 hours, who has objected in some form or fashion to my current relationship with Naruto." Tsunade grimaced in a mixture of sympathy and annoyance before turning to Sakura. "Sakura Haruno," she began firmly, "explain, please, and it had better be good." "Yes, milady. Given the timing of what happened when you terminated my apprenticeship, and of Tsubaki Kenpi suddenly occupying my apprenticeship and getting involved with Naruto, I find it very difficult to believe that this is mere coincidence. It's my belief that Tsubaki wanted me out of the way so that she could occupy my position, and worm her way into my teammate's life," she stated with conviction. Tsunade didn't look impressed as she responded, "Is that it? Do you have any evidence to back such charges? Do you have anything beyond mere speculation on which to base such claims?" "Well, no, milady, but," Sakura began, stumbling over the answer before being interrupted by Tsunade in a tone denoting cold anger. "Then what made you come to such a stupid and preposterous conclusion?" "Tsubaki didn't ask me to make her my apprentice, Sakura. I offered her the job of my own volition after I ended my apprenticeship with you. Your apprenticeship was terminated not because she wanted to move in on what you believed to be yours, but because you were guilty of gross medical malpractice. Do you even know how your name came up in the matter? I'll tell you, Tsubaki performed a full diagnostic scan on Naruto's body, per standard procedure. When she performed her scan, she found swelling and bruising in Naruto's brain." Shikamaru's eyes went wide as he heard this. He turned to gape at Sakura while Tsunade continued to lay into the girl. She scanned further for pathogens and was able to rule out meningitis and encephalitis, and then asked Naruto how he hurt his head, and if he was in any pain. Naruto himself said that the pain started here in my office, when you were driving your fist into his skull because he objected to going to the hospital to get his arm looked at after he first used the wind style, Rasenshuriken. He said that what he felt was normal after being hit by you. Sakura's expression became more fearful and remorseful as Tsunade recounted the entire event. Tsunade continued, "Tsubaki asked him who created his chart, and he said that he believed you did. And that was true, was it not?" Sakura nodded as a stray tear began to roll down her face. "Well, then," Tsunade pressed on, "after he told her that, Tsubaki asked if any other staff at the hospital had attended to you, to which he answered, no. Because of the unrecorded injuries, and because of the frequency with which Naruto admitted having suffered the symptoms he had, she then made the request to keep you out of Naruto's room until she could get to the bottom of what had happened. That's when she came to me and asked me to verify her findings, because she honestly had a hard time believing what her diagnosis told her. We came to Naruto's room, found you there, and, well, you know the rest." Sakura's fear and remorse turned into anger. Tsunade had noticed that she was becoming angrier and angrier lately, with greater frequency, and it seemed to take all of her self-control to keep from snapping and losing herself to rage. Deciding it was time to deal with Sakura before an incident occurred, Tsunade stood up and looked Sakura dead in the eyes. "Sakura, what's really the issue here? She asked firmly, ever since you were told to never strike Naruto again, you've been getting angrier and angrier. I want to know why. Why? Sakura repeated Tsunade's question to her in a cold low tone, I'll tell you why. Naruto was the one constant I could count on in my life, and now he's been taken from me. I could beat on Naruto, and it would actually help me to feel better and calm down. I could depend on Naruto's promise to bring Sasuke back to the village, back to me. Now, my anger just builds and builds, and because I can't go anywhere near him outside of missions, I don't know what to do with any of it. Sakura started shedding tears of anger as she yelled the last question, tell me. What am I supposed to do with my anger and frustration now that I have nowhere to vent it, and nobody to vent it on? You grow the hell up, and let your anger go. Came the voice of Shikamaru, firmly and much more loudly than expected, who the hell do you think you are, huh? What gives you the right to use Naruto as your frustration vent and gopher? You want Uchiha back. Go out there and get him yourself. You had the nerve to make that ridiculous, once-in-a-lifetime request, to him all those years ago, when you've never once done anything for him. Just how selfish and overly self-important can you be? Is your anger even justified? What are you angry about, and why? If you're going to get angry at someone, get angry at yourself. You have only yourself to blame for where you are. It was your fault that you lost your apprenticeship from what I've heard here, and it's also your fault that Naruto wisely moved on from you. Maybe you'd be the one in Tsubaki's place if you'd treated him better. Did you ever stop to think about that? Sakura breathed heavily, taking a few breaths before answering, again in a low tone, I think about that all the time, every single day, and that's exactly why I'm so angry. I'll also admit to being jealous, as well. Tsubaki Kenpi has my apprenticeship, and she has the love of the man who once loved me. This time it was Tsubaki who interrupted, Sakura, I'm going to tell you the exact same thing I told Hinata Hyuga earlier this morning. I will not engage or take part in these stupid, petty, childish games that you kids seem to love playing these days. As far as my reporting you goes, I reported the information I had gleaned from Naruto's chart, and that I received from Naruto himself, because of evidence that a medical professional, not you personally, but a medical professional, violated established medical ethics, broke the law, and endangered a patient's life and health by doing so. And on top of that, once Lady Tsunade and I returned to Naruto's room, we find you in there, in direct violation of orders given to you by a superior while on duty. If anyone else had been responsible for that chart, I'd have done the exact same thing, not because I had anything to gain, but because reporting suspected malpractice is required by law and it was the right, moral and ethical thing to do. As far as stealing Naruto's love, if that's how you see it, Tsubaki waited for Sakura to look her in the eye before continuing, I only sought to comfort him through a time of intense grief that you were made aware of before I was. I only sought to be there for him, and to help him, and things just went from there. Besides that, you don't love him or care for him, so what does it matter to you if he now loves me? It felt good to be loved by someone. It made me feel worth something, as a person. Sakura's voice lowered in volume as she finished. So all this time, you've only been using him for your own selfish ends, without a care of how it might hurt him or affect him in the end. Is that what you mean to tell me? Tsubaki asked with a growl before continuing, how can you even look at yourself in the mirror and not be disgusted with the person you see there? Shikamaru's right, you don't care about anyone but yourself. You never cared about Naruto, and the truth is you don't even love the Uchiha like you claim to. You only love what each of them represents to you, and frankly that's reprehensible. Maybe if you started genuinely caring about people other than yourself, without ulterior motives, you'd find yourself to be a lot less angry. Sakura hung her head, shedding silent tears, her anger gone, replaced by shame. Tsubaki's words had apparently struck a very sensitive nerve, as she could say nothing in response. Well, now that that's over, Tsunade responded, Shikamaru, Sakura, what do you have to report to me? Shikamaru gave his report concerning the encoded message that Jiraiya had sent back to the village. Apparently, the cryptoanalysis squad had made no progress in deciphering Jiraiya's hidden message, but they suggested that someone close to Jiraiya might know something that could be the key to the cipher. Tsunade informed him that she didn't know what it could be upon further examination of the picture, so Shikamaru would be tracking down either Kakashi or Naruto today. Once he was finished with his report, Tsubaki responded, "Naruto's at my place, Shikamaru. You can find him there." Tsunade interjected, "Actually Shikamaru, wait for a bit before going over there. Try Kakashi first. As you know, Naruto's going through what may well be the hardest time of his life, right now, as he's just lost one of the people who's most important to him." Tsubaki added, "It's true, we were talking last night, and Jiraiya was the closest thing to a father that Naruto's ever known." Tsubaki trailed off, recalling her thoughts from earlier this morning. "Father." Tsubaki turned her gaze to the portrait of Minato Namikaze that was hanging in the Hokage's office. She started studying his face, and narrowed her eyes. "Wait just 1 minute," she began, standing up and moving closer to the portrait. As she got closer, Sakura seemed confused as to what she was doing, while Shikamaru just watched, waiting to see what conclusion she might draw. Tsunade simply waited with bated breath, not wanting to give anything away. When Tsubaki was right in front of the portrait, she brought up a finger and began tracing 3 invisible whisker marks on each cheek. Once she had the image in her mind's eye, she gasped and exclaimed in breathless shock, "My Kami, how could we have been so blind as to miss that?" Tsunade was about to speak up, but Shikamaru beat her to it. I was wondering how long it would take for someone else to connect the dots." "Figure what out?" Sakura asked in confusion. "The 4th Hokage," Tsubaki replied, whirling around to face Tsunade, pointing to the portrait behind her and speaking in an almost accusatory tone, "This is Naruto's father." Sakura snorted and laughed. "What? Are you kidding me?" It didn't take long for Sakura to notice that she was the only one who found the claim amusing. She quieted down, and looked around before exclaiming, "Oh, come on. Don't tell me any of you really believe that." Tsunade turned to Shikamaru. "How did you figure it out, Shikamaru?" Sakura gasped while Shikamaru answered, "Well, taking into consideration the fact that Naruto just happened to be born as the Nine Tails attacked Konoha, he just happened to be the baby that Naruto sealed the fox into. Any and all family history about Naruto had been stricken from his records and classified, and the fact that Naruto and the 4th Hokage look so much alike that a retarded sheep could see the resemblance. It wasn't really that hard to figure out." Sakura was now plainly and openly embarrassed by her declaration. Tsubaki, already having realized that they should have seen it earlier, felt no further embarrassment but seemed rather angry. Tsunade was impassive, though it was easy to see that her guard was up, and she was trying to anticipate any number of responses, particularly from the woman who loved Naruto. Tsubaki was the first to respond, and she wasn't happy. "Tsunade, why has this been kept secret? Why hasn't Naruto been told? Why hasn't the village as a whole been told, for that matter?" Tsunade paused for a few moments, closed her eyes, and looked at the other 2 occupants of the room. Taking on a cold, firm tone, she instructed them, "Shikamaru, Sakura, you're dismissed. Leave the room and tell no one of what you've learned here in regards to Naruto's heritage, is that understood?" Yes, milady," Sakura responded nervously. "Well, I've kept it to myself all this time, because I figured that those above my pay grade had a good reason for not saying anything. What's a little longer?" "Man, what a drag," Shikamaru replied in his usual bored deadpan. With that, both Sakura and Shikamaru left the office. Once they were gone, Tsunade looked at Tsubaki and began with a flinted gaze, "Tsubaki, the only reason I'm even talking about this to you is because not only are you my closest friend, but you're also very important to Naruto as well. If it wasn't for my trust in you as a person, I wouldn't be telling you any of this. Now, I'm asking that you let me fully explain without interruption before asking questions and saying anything else. Can you do that?" Tsubaki nodded, prompting Tsunade to begin her explanation. "We had our reasons for not revealing Naruto's heritage to the village. Both of his parents died that night. His father, as you know, was Minato Namikaze, the yellow flash of the leaf. His mother was Kushina Uzumaki, the red-hot-blooded habanero." Tsubaki gasped at this, as Kushina Uzumaki had been another one of her heroes growing up. Now, the reason he was given his mother's maiden name was to protect him from the numerous enemies that both of his parents had made during the Third Great Shinobi War, as well as Minato's enemies within the village itself. As you know, the Hokage isn't always well liked by everyone, and usually, the more popular a Hokage is with the people of the village, the more unpopular they tend to be with those in power. That's just how politics works. Minato was no exception to this. The reason why Naruto's status as a Jinchuriki was disclosed was because his father's dying wish was for Naruto to be seen as a hero for protecting this village every day of his life simply by existing. In addition to that, the world at large knew of the Nine-Tails attack, and word that the Leaf had a Jinchuriki of its own would serve as a deterrent to future invasion, especially since the Fox's attack greatly weakened the village militarily. Tsunade sighed somberly before continuing. Sadly, while attempts at invasion were in fact prevented by this knowledge being spread, the people didn't see Naruto as a hero. They saw him as a monster. The third did all he could to keep Naruto safe by passing a law that did not allow open speech about Naruto's burden to those who didn't already know, particularly Naruto's own generation. Well, you've had a chance to catch glimpses of Naruto's life growing up, and you also hated him at one point, yourself, so you pretty well know the rest of the story. Tsubaki sighed sadly herself and nodded, feeling ashamed of herself in a way that she hadn't in years. Recovering after a few moments, Tsubaki picked her head back up and looked Tsunade dead in the eye once more. Okay, that explains why his heritage was never disclosed to the village while he was a child, but what about now? We can't reveal his heritage to him or anyone else until we know that he's strong enough to protect himself, Tsunade began, only to be interrupted this time. I'm sorry, Tsunade, but I don't buy that. I read the mission report about Naruto's defeat of Kakuzu of Akatsuki so that I could get a better picture of what Naruto had done to receive his injuries. If memory serves, Naruto defeated Kakuzu, an enemy that had not only overpowered Kakashi Hatake and two Chunin with him, but who had actually fought the first Hokage and walked away to talk about it, and he did it by himself. So please, tell me, Tsunade, just how strong does Naruto need to be in order to be deemed sufficiently strong enough to protect himself? Tsunade closed her eyes and sighed, this time in resignation. Tsubaki caught on, narrowed her eyes and pressed further. There's another reason, isn't there? One that's a little more personal. Tsunade, after a few seconds, nodded slowly. What's the real reason, Tsunade? Tsubaki asked patiently. The truth is, Tsunade began, before pausing as though struggling to get her answer out, the truth is that Naruto may well hate me for keeping this from him, and for not being there for him when I knew who his parents were. It's not something I've thought too much about lately, as he's only recently come into his own power, but, she turned to her friend, with a sad, almost pleading look on her face, I don't know if I could handle losing him, Tsubaki. I love him, I can't help but think of him as my son, at times, and the idea of him never wanting to speak to me again. Tsunade's voice began to break as she trailed off. She hung her head, unable to finish the thought that had been on the tip of her tongue. Tsubaki, for her part, understood quite well what Tsunade's fear was. She walked around the desk to Tsunade's chair and wrapped her arms around the busty Hokage. After a few moments, once Tsunade's composure had returned, Tsubaki let her go and expressed, Tsunade, I'll talk to Naruto to prepare him for what you have to say. He'll listen to me. I'll even be here with you when you tell him for moral support, for both of you. But you need to have more faith in Naruto than that. You owe it to him to tell him about this. You owe it to him to tell the village about this. Even when it gets out that the yellow flash left an heir, Naruto's more than capable of protecting himself from any attempts against his life or his well-being. Tsubaki continued after a few moments' pause, is there anything that his parents owned that was maybe left to Naruto in trust? He is the rightful owner of any property and holdings they had now as their only surviving heir. Mementos, property, jutsu. His parents' jutsu are archived and locked away, so I can give him those, but no property or personal possessions of theirs survived the Nine-Tails attack. Their home was destroyed, along with everything inside it. I'm pretty sure that I can track down any financial assets they might have had, but that'll take a while. If anything, I'm sure that the money's grown since it's been doing little more than sitting around in various banks for 16 years. But the worst part of all of this is that I don't have mementos or anything to give to Naruto that might connect him with his parents as people. Maybe, you can talk to people who knew them and see if they have any pictures of them or something. Tsubaki suggested. Tsunade's eyes went wide as she looked up at her friend, of course. Why didn't I think of that? I'm sure I still have some of my own, somewhere, actually. Tsunade suddenly pulled out some paper and began to list anyone who might have had some connection to either Minato Namikaze or Kushina Uzumaki. Tsunade? Tsubaki gently asked, grabbing the woman's attention. Yes, Tsubaki. What do you want to do right now, as far as telling Naruto, I mean? Well, Tsunade pondered, as frightened as I am by the idea of how he might react when I do tell him, you're right. He does deserve to know. I'll tell him when Jiraiya's estate is executed to him. That sounds good. I'll do what I can to prepare him for it, but, Tsubaki smiled knowingly, I think he might just surprise you by his reaction. What do you mean? Tsunade asked curiously. Just wait and see, Tsubaki responded cryptically before turning to leave. She stopped at the door and turned back to Tsunade. How would you like to have dinner with Naruto and me tonight? You two could share some Jiraiya stories. Tsunade chuckled. You know, I think I'll take you up on that, Tsubaki. Your place. 7 or so. Tsubaki nodded and left Tsunade's office, leaving the woman to handle her paperwork. Naruto awoke the following morning, having slept very fitfully. His conscious mind immediately flooded itself with thoughts and memories of his and Tsubaki's activities last night. He couldn't help the satisfied yet tired smile that crept across his face, accompanied by a blush when he remembered that she'd left her black silk stockings on. He opened his eyes to take in the visage of the woman that had enchanted him so over the last day and a half, only to find that she wasn't there. His smile morphed into a confused frown. He rubbed the sleep from his eyes and looked around the room. There were no sounds inside the apartment, meaning that she might have stepped out for a bit. He then noticed a folded piece of paper on Tsubaki's pillow with his name on it. Curious, Naruto took the piece of paper and opened it, reading the contents of the note on it. Good morning, my sunshine. I stepped out to go to Tsunade's office so that I could get those pictures that Shuza took last night. I'll be back before noon so that we can get some lunch and spend the day together. I've made you some breakfast and put it in the oven to keep it warm for you. Please make yourself at home, okay? Your princess loves you, Tsubaki. P.S. You were wonderful last night. Closing parenthesis. XOXOX, hugs and kisses. Naruto smiled and chuckled at the note that Tsubaki left him. Despite the fact that he was currently grieving the loss of the man he'd come to love as a father, he couldn't ever remember a time where he'd been happier than he'd been in the last 36 or so hours. Tsubaki really was all he could have ever asked for in a woman, and then some. He found himself thanking whatever divinity had chosen to smile upon him when he or she had given him the woman that was now his angel. He pulled himself out of bed and pulled his boxers on, heading to the kitchen to get his breakfast from the oven. Once he pulled it out, he turned the oven off and brought it to the table, taking in the mouth-watering aroma of Tsubaki's cooking before breaking his chopsticks and giving thanks. He dug in with gusto, the wonderful meal tasting just as delectable as it did yesterday when Tsubaki prepared the same thing for the two of them. After breakfast, he showered and performed his morning hygiene rituals. Once he finished and dried off, he suddenly found himself feeling rather depressed. Now that he was by himself, his thoughts had drifted back to Jiraiya, and he found himself saddened, missing his father figure. As he looked into the mirror, he realized that the only set of clothes he had with him was what he wore last night. While it certainly looked great for a date at night, it certainly wouldn't do for a shinobi to wear such clothing during the day, especially with how he typically traveled across the rooftops. The last thing he needed was his pants splitting mid-leap, and walking through the streets on a hot, muggy day in dressy clothing was not an activity that particularly appealed to him. He decided that after he got dressed, he would head back to his apartment and change into his regular black and orange tracksuit. As he was putting his pants and shirt on, he heard the doorbell ring. Who could that be? He wondered as he moved to answer the door. When he opened the front door, he saw none other than Shikamaru Nara. Hey, Shikamaru. What's up? What do you want? Naruto asked in greeting, somewhat tiredly. Shikamaru raised a quizzical eyebrow at Naruto and asked, well, for starters, how's about letting me come in? Actually, I'm about to head back to my place to hang these clothes up and change. Okay, so I'll come with you, Shikamaru insisted. Oh, okay, then, Naruto responded numbly as he exited Tsubaki's apartment and locked it before leading Shikamaru back to his own home. Not a word passed between the two of them on the trek to Naruto's apartment. The only time they stopped was when Naruto got sidetracked by a display stand for makeout tactics. He simply stared at the books, and his mind was flooded with memories of Jiraiya once again. Suppressing the memories that threatened to overwhelm him, and the tears that came with them, he continued on his way to his apartment, Shikamaru following once more, this time with a raised eyebrow and a concerned frown. Once they arrived, Naruto replaced his clothes. Shikamaru sat on the floor while Naruto sat on his bed. Shikamaru showed him the photograph of the numbers that had been burned into Fukusaku's back. "Do these numbers mean anything to you?" Shikamaru inquired hopefully. Naruto just seemed to space out as he stared blankly at the photograph, unresponsive to Shikamaru's inquiry. "Hey, Naruto," Shikamaru spoke up, trying to draw his attention, "you still with me or what?" Naruto continued to sit there, unmoving and unresponsive. "Naruto!" Shikamaru yelled out his name as he leaned forward, causing Naruto to flinch and gasp as he came back to the present moment. "Oh, right. Sorry," Naruto responded with an embarrassed chuckle before asking, "So, what'd you say?" "Alright," Shikamaru began resignedly, "you're coming with me, let's go," and with that, Shikamaru rose to his feet. "To where?" Naruto asked dumbly. "Just come on." What? Naruto stuttered in confusion. Naruto, following Shikamaru's lead, found himself outside of Hidden Leaf Hospital. He and Shikamaru were now standing out in front of the hospital, in the walled entryway to the grounds. "Why'd you bring me here?" Naruto asked, just as confused as he was when they left his apartment. "Just wait," Shikamaru instructed him, his annoyance leading to mild impatience when just a second later, they heard the main door open. "Ah, there she is." "Huh," Naruto replied dumbly as he turned his gaze to one Kurenai Yuhi, whose stomach was quite a bit larger than he remembered it being. "Huh, Kurenai-sensei," Naruto blurted out in surprise. "That's right," Shikamaru answered nonchalantly. Naruto's first impulse was to ask how she'd gotten so fat, but remembering his conversation with Tsubaki about being more thoughtful, decided to voice it differently. I'm gonna guess that you're not here due to indigestion or something, so, he trailed off embarrassingly. "She's pregnant, not overweight," Shikamaru retorted tiredly before continuing, "Oh boy, well, at least you're not as obnoxious as you used to be. I was half expecting you to blurt out something like how she was hospitalized for eating too much barbecue or something." Naruto could only blush and grin sheepishly while scratching the back of his head and chuckling. "So, then, you mean, Naruto began as he turned back to the mother-to-be. "Shikamaru," Kurenai began in good-natured annoyance, "you know, you don't have to come every time." "Sorry. No can do," he responded with a knowing, almost teasing smile. "Asuma made me promise him." Kurenai simply smiled warmly and understandingly at Shikamaru. Naruto guessed that they'd had this conversation before, and probably would again, and it would probably end the same way every time. Naruto felt a strange sense of peace as he watched the pregnant beauty walking away from them. "Shikamaru, what did Asuma-sensei ask you to do?" "Their child will be my student," he answered, his jaw locked in place, showing his resolve to discharge that responsibility to the best of his ability. "Huh," Naruto gasped in surprise. "I'm being serious. He entrusted me with that." Shikamaru trailed off, turning his gaze forward and looking off into the distance, as if remembering the moment when Asuma gave him that charge. "I heard about Master Jiraiya," he began anew after a few moments of silence, hoping that what he had to say would help Naruto get through this rough patch. "Having lost my teacher just like you, I understand exactly what you're going through right now." Shikamaru closed his eyes and hung his head for a brief second before opening his eyes and turning his gaze towards Naruto, but whining and sulking won't make things better. Naruto glowered slightly at Shikamaru's seemingly harsh words. Shikamaru continued in an even, calm tone, "Face it. Both of us are way past that point in our lives." Naruto's glowering frown became a frown of confusion. "What do you mean?" Shikamaru turned his gaze forward once more. "Asuma-sensei imparted a lot of knowledge to me. Some lessons were important, some not so much, it didn't matter. The same for you, right?" Naruto turned his gaze forward as he pondered the truth of Shikamaru's words, as Shikamaru pressed on, "and an infinite number of priceless things." Shikamaru let that sink in for a moment before continuing, so I think it's time for us to step up. How so? Naruto asked, turning back to Shikamaru, intrigued at the idea. To stop being students, and become teachers, Shikamaru responded, with greater resolve and conviction than Naruto had ever heard from his friend. Shikamaru turned back to Naruto with a smirk. It's gonna be a drag, but we can't keep complaining. Naruto now gave Shikamaru his undivided attention, hanging on every word. Eventually, you'll be the one paying for the ramen, and someone will be calling you, Naruto-sensei. Shikamaru took a few steps forward and turned around to stand face to face with Naruto. After all, we can't stay brats forever. Not if we want to become cool shinobi, like the type of shinobi that Asuma and Jiraiya both were. He winked at Naruto as he mentioned Asuma and Jiraiya. Both of them were silent for several seconds, Shikamaru again letting his words sink in, Naruto unconsciously smiling as he thought about just how truly cool Jiraiya was. You're right, Naruto responded, a serene smile on his face. Shikamaru, thank you. Giving him a manly smile, Shikamaru added, so pull yourself together. He pulled out the photograph once more and finished, because you've got some work to do. His determination restored, he looked Shikamaru dead in the eye with the fire in his own as he gave a manly smile in response, all right.